So a recent trip to Via Rail's maintenance yards has got me rethinking this area, which was originally going to become the Aldershot passenger station. That said, I visited Via Rail, I got a tour of the facilities, and I think I can change this into a bustling passenger maintenance yard. Let's get started. So before anything else, let's start with a backstory. Shortly after I posted my train spotting video from the Mimico station, someone at Via Rail contacted me and they invited me to a tour of the facility. A few weeks later, I had a formal tour of the facility, the buildings, and the surrounding yard. Needless to say, I learned a lot and I was determined to add some representation of this facility to my layout. The trouble is, I want to model a 100-acre maintenance yard using the footprint available to me. An 8-foot long teardrop with a shelf narrowing to 12 inches at its narrowest point. Let's go back in time for a moment. When I first conceived of this new layout, the initial plan was to take up a single wall, and the layout ended in this area here with the track looping back to the station. I hadn't completed laying the staging tracks when I decided to extend the layout around the corner and add another 8 feet of baseboard. At the time, it seemed reasonable that this new extension would represent the Aldershot passenger station, as it serviced both GO Transit and Via Rail trains. Well, now that I've visited the maintenance yard, I'm determined to change this imperfect teardrop into a yard that represents a 100-acre facility. I have a wish list of features I want to include to try to create a reasonable representation of the original. There is no way I'll be able to duplicate the size and scale of the actual yard, but I can do my best to add some iconic elements. On the list of must-haves is the maintenance building. This is a large structure, and I'm hopeful that some representation of this building can help disguise the inclined track along the back of the peninsula. During my original tour, I learned that much of the building isn't used like before. So the most utilized part of the building is the 3 long bays on the north side of the facility. These bays are used to maintain LRC, HEP, and Canadian services. The short shed was originally used for RDC maintenance, and the track beside it stores the Canadian consists when they have a 24-hour layover. I plan to reduce the maintenance building to a single facade and try to include this RDC shed. The second feature I want to include is the wash station. While not currently in use, it is a fun structure to model and justifies an additional yard track. I want to add a track that represents the Y. This can serve as a short yard lead or an engine storage track. When I originally visited the yard, I thought it was interesting how the trains backed into this lonely, scruffy industrial spur to change direction. While I won't be able to turn trains, the suggestion of the Y is a simple way to reference the prototype. I also want to add 1 or 2 tracks representing the historical storage facility. These tracks hold a collection of equipment owned by the Via Rail Historical Society and are some of the projects that are currently seeking funding for restoration. Finally, and arguably the most important feature that I want to include is Via Rail's fueling facility. This is a highly visible landmark and something that I have admired for years. With this wish list, and considering my limitations with the layout footprint, this is the track plan I've come up with. The maintenance building is represented by a large facade that spans much of the backdrop and helps to disguise the inclined tracks running toward Union Station. I've included the wash station on another yard track with the hopes of disguising the loop at the end of the teardrop. I've added a yard lead track representing the entrance to the Y, and another yard lead or drill track that is parallel to the main line that loosely follows the prototype as it runs into what could possibly become a smaller representation of the Mimico passenger station. Now, before I start any of this, I've decided to finally address the lighting. For the past year, I've been working with the lighting originally installed in the basement. So I took advantage of a sale on LED lights and bought a 12-pack of 20-watt, 5000K LED utility lights. I installed all 12 lights, staggering their placement to help minimize hotspots and create an overall even coverage. Then I added a curved valance that follows the contour of the layout to create a nice, finished museum quality appearance. So the original turnouts on this area are all controlled by servos and Arduino controllers. The new area that I'm adding, the VIA yard, which right now represents these two turnouts here, I'd like to have them manually operated. Now, this is for two reasons. So the reason is that the yard might be an area that I would like to switch, and I don't mind doing that with manual turnouts. The second part is installing the servos and Arduino controllers for this was a lot of work, and I would effectively be redoing a lot of that in order to integrate these two turnouts, and I'm not interested in that. So the way I see it is that the automated turnouts represent the main line, so I can let that go. But when it comes to switching, it becomes a manual process, and I'll do so using Caboose Hobby ground throws and picks to uncouple the cars. So what I've done is that through that hole that I bored through with the aluminum rod, I've now inserted like a little aluminum culvert that runs underneath the tracks, and I have removed the top half on both ends to create a working channel for the throw rod. I've also put a small loop on the end of the throw bar on the switch, so I'll be able to now run a wire underneath the tracks and up through that and hopefully into the actual caboose point throw. I have completed the installation of all the 8 new turnouts that have changed the Aldershot station into my Via Rail maintenance yard. The next thing I need to do is I need to gap all of the rails. The red pins represent a gapping, and I need to still wire the turnouts. They have a dead frog, and so I need to wire them as I've done in the past so that there's continuity through the actual turnout. The other thing that I've completed is the installation of all of the Caboose Hobbies ground throws. I used a fairly flexible aluminum tubing to create a channel for some piano wire so that I can control each of the turnouts manually from the front of the layout. So this will become more of a manual switching area, so I can bring in passenger equipment and move it around, and I can do so manually while the rest of the trains run sort of on an automatic system through the other two main lines. So here's an example of one of the turnouts that I've got a manual throw set up to operate it from the front edge of the layout. And the other thing I want to do in terms of control or power control is I'm going to use one of these small sliding single pole single throw switches to control the power in the actual siding at the back. That way I have a manual switch to control the siding and a manual switch to control the turnout. I have completed installing all of the turnouts. All of the manual switch machines are in place, and each of the switches to control the individual powering of the sidings are all in place. And so now we can take a look at how this basic yard operates. The train is going to enter into the siding as it did before when it was Aldershot Station, but instead it's going to diverge away from the main line and move into the yard lead or the drill track, which is represented as the third line at what could possibly become the Mimico station. Once the consist is far enough along the drill track, I can throw the switch to the yard and reverse the train into the maintenance bays. I have 3 sidings that are specifically designated for train storage, and I have a 4th which will likely become train storage as well, but represents the siding that would go to the car washer. The 2 sidings closest to the wall can accommodate 6 passenger cars and 2 engines, and the subsequent sidings, the 3rd siding here and the wash track, can accommodate 1 or 2 engines and 5 passenger cars. This works out to be perfect because I originally designed Union Station to be able to hold at maximum 6 passenger cars, ideally 5 passenger cars. So I can do 1 or 2 Canadian units, I can do local or corridor units here, and I can do random storage here on the washing track. So there you have it, the process by which I tried to jam 100 acres worth of maintenance yard into an 8-foot shelf. I've already started cutting up sheets of foam core to block out where some of the buildings may go, and I suspect I'll be thinking about that for quite some time. In the meantime, I can now return to the rest of the layout where I can start thinking about building some structures or installing a backdrop. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.